An-Nabighah ad-Dhubyani, poet of tribe, court, and political wisdom. In order to understand An-Nabighah ad-Dhubyani, we must first enter the world that produced him. Pre-Islamic Arabia was not a single united state, ruled by one king or governed by one central authority. It was a vast world of deserts, oases, wells, caravan routes, pasture lands, sacred months, seasonal markets, tribal alliances, blood feuds, and shifting balances of power. Life was harsh, movement was necessary, and survival depended not only on courage but on judgment. Arabia's geography shaped its society. Much of the peninsula was marked by dryness, heat, scarcity of water, and the absence of a great river that could create stable agricultural life across the interior. Instead, there were scattered oases, wadis that filled only when floods came, and routes followed by caravans, pilgrims, and tribes searching for pasture. In some regions, drought could last for years. In others, sudden floods could reshape grazing lands and threaten settlements. This harshness produced movement, raiding, competition over pasture, and dependence on water, but it also produced hospitality, rescue, protection, and the moral duty of muru'ah, the Arab code of honorable conduct. In such a world, a person could not survive as an isolated individual. The tribe became the natural form of life. The individual belonged to his family, his clan, and his tribe. The tribe protected him, avenged him, defended his honor, and gave him his place in the world. In return, he carried its burdens, fought for it, preserved its memory, and defended its name. Tribal belonging was therefore not merely social, it was existential. To lose one's tribe was almost to lose one's protection, identity, and future. The tribe in pre-Islamic Arabia was more than a group of relatives. It was a political body, a military body, a moral body, and a living memory. Its elders preserved experience, its warriors protected its borders, its poets preserved its glory, its allies strengthened its survival, its enemies threatened not only its wealth, but its very existence. A wrong decision could lead to years of war, a careless insult could ignite revenge, a broken alliance could expose the tribe to danger, a rash young leader could throw his people into ruin. The tribal system can almost be seen as a small political order. The tent formed the household, several tents formed a camp, the camp became a living group, related groups formed the tribe. The tribe had a chief, but he was not an absolute king. He needed consultation. Around him stood men of judgment, the poet, the orator, the warrior, and sometimes the spiritual figure of the tribe. The poet, therefore, was not outside political life. He was one of the organs through which the tribe thought, remembered, warned, praised, and defended itself. This is the world that appears again and again behind the poetry of An-Nabighah, a world where honor matters, but wisdom matters more, where courage is praised, but reckless courage can destroy, where loyalty to allies is not emotion only, but political necessity. In such a society, poetry was not merely art, it was the public voice of the tribe. The poet praised, defended, warned, threatened, apologized, negotiated, and preserved memory. A poem could raise a tribe's status, shame an enemy, reconcile allies, soften the anger of a king, or warn people away from disaster. The poet was not simply a singer of beautiful words. He could be a spokesman, a diplomat, a moral teacher, and sometimes a judge of men. This is why the great pre-Islamic poets were remembered not only for their language, but for the worlds they carried in their poetry. Their poems contain ruins, journeys, camels, horses, women, storms, battles, generosity, wine, wisdom, death, kings, tribes, and memory. But behind these separate images there is often one deeper unity, the struggle of human beings against time, danger, loss, and death. Before reaching An-Nabighah himself, we must also understand the larger political world surrounding northern Arabia. The Arab tribes did not live in complete isolation. To the northwest stood the Ghassanids, Arab Christian rulers connected with the Byzantine world. To the northeast stood the Lakmids of al-Hirah, Arab kings connected with the Sasanian Persian Empire. Between these two powers moved the tribes of Arabia, sometimes seeking protection, sometimes entering alliances, sometimes trading, sometimes raiding, and sometimes becoming involved in the conflicts of kings. This wider world is essential for understanding An-Nabighah because his life was shaped by the desert and the court together. He belonged to Dibyan, but his poetry moved between Dibyan, Ghassan, and al-Hirah. His art was therefore tribal, political, and courtly at the same time. The Ghassanid world represented kingship, Christianity, Syrian civilization, military power, and a refined courtly life. Their lands were connected with places such as Hawran, al-Jawlan, Basra, Jassim, and Jilik. The Lakmid world of al-Hira represented another kind of Arab kingship, tied to Persia, wealth, patronage, and the danger of court politics. The Arab poet who entered these courts entered a world of gifts and honor, but also envy, suspicion, and danger. A king could raise a poet, but he could also destroy him. Praise could bring wealth, but one misunderstood line could lead to exile. This tension between poetry and power is one of the central keys to An-Nabighah's life. Now we can turn slowly to his tribe. An-Nabighah belonged to Dibyan, one of the great branches of Ghatafan. Dibyan lived in a world of alliances and rivalries with tribes such as Abs, Fazara, Banu Amir, Banu Asad, Tamim, Arabab, Banu Dabba, and others. The famous conflicts of the Arabs, especially the wars involving Abs and Dibyan, show how fragile tribal unity could be. Old alliances could be broken, former allies could become enemies. A tribe could become strong through unity or weak through division. The tribes had a system of alliance, or hilf. In a world without central government, a tribe could not always stand alone. Alliances were a way of creating balance, widening protection, and preventing isolation. These alliances were not casual friendships. They could be sworn at sacred places, sealed through ritual, and remembered as binding obligations. For An-Nabighah, alliance was not a secondary matter. It was one of the foundations of survival. This is why his tribal poetry is so important. He was not a poet of blind tribal rage. He was a poet of tribal survival. He loved honor, but he feared foolishness. He valued courage, but he warned against reckless youth. He praised strength, but he knew that strength without judgment could ruin a people. An-Nabighah can be described as a poet with a clear tribal policy, love of peace, preservation of alliances, restraint in conflict, and refusal to let temporary anger destroy long-term safety. His love of peace did not mean weakness. It meant that he understood something many warriors forgot. Peace often needs strength behind it, and strength often depends on allies. This explains his famous defense of Banu Asad. Banu Amir once approached Dibyan with a dangerous proposal. They wanted Dibyan to cut the alliance between themselves and Banu Asad, and to join Banu Amir instead. Dibyan answered with a test. Remove your own allies from among you, and we will remove ours. Banu Amir refused. At that point, An-Nabighah saw the matter clearly. This was not sincere reconciliation. It was an attempt to make Dibyan abandon one of its strongest supports. He says, قالت بنو عامر خالوا بني أسد يا بؤس للجهل ضرارا لأقوام. Banu Amir said, sever yourselves from Banu Asad. How wretched ignorance is when it brings harm upon peoples. The word khalu does not simply mean leave in a casual sense. It means to break off, to cut ties, to separate from an ally. And An-Nabighah calls this not strategy, but ignorance. Then he makes his policy clear. فَصَالِحُونَ جَمِيعًا إِن بَدَى لَكُمُ وَلَا تَقُولُوا لَنَا أَمْثَالَهَا عَامٍ. Then make peace with all of us, if you wish, but do not demand such a severance from us again, O Amir. The final word, am, is a shortened vocative for Amir. It is as if he says, O Amir, do not ask this of us again. Do not ask us to purchase peace with betrayal. This is not merely poetry. It is political judgment. An-Nabighah is saying, we accept peace but not treachery. We accept reconciliation but not at the price of abandoning an old ally. A tribe that betrays its allies today becomes isolated tomorrow. Elsewhere, he gives this idea one of its most powerful images. فَهُمْ دِرْعِي التي استلأمت فيها إلى يوم النصار وهم مجني. They are the coat of mail in which I have armed myself until the day of An-Nisar. They are my shield. An ally is not merely a friend. He becomes part of one's own protection. To abandon him is to remove one's armor before battle. This alliance with Banu Asad appears again when An-Nabighah reassures Dhubyani after the loss of other supporters. ليهنئ بني ذبيان أن بلادهم خلت لهم من كل مولى وتابع سوى أسد يحمونها كل شارق بألفي كمي ذي سلاح ودارع. Let Banu Dhubyani take comfort that their land has been cleared of every client and follower except Asad, who guarded at every dawn with 2,000 fighting men, armed and armored. The point is not simply praise, it is political reassurance. Even if Abs has separated, even if Banu Amir is hostile, Dhubyani is not naked. Banu Asad remain. The hostility between Dhubyani, Abs, and Banu Amir was not accidental. It was rooted in a long chain of old wars, revenge, shifting alliances, and the famous war of Dahis and Al-Ghabra. Abs and Dhubyani had once belonged to the larger world of Ghatafan, but war separated them. Banu Amir, who had their own old enmity with Ghatafan, eventually became linked with Abs against Dhubyani. This background explains why An-Nabighah's insistence on preserving Banu Asad as an ally was not poetic ornament. It was survival strategy. And yet this policy of caution and alliance did not always please his own people. Here we reach a revealing detail in his life. Some men from An-Nabighah's own tribal world saw his restraint as weakness. This only makes sense after we understand his policy. An-Nabighah believed in peace, alliance, and calculated action. But the heroic ideal of the desert often praised immediate courage, quick retaliation, and visible defiance. To some men, caution looked like fear. One of the clearest examples appears in the dispute over Du-Uqur. Banu Dhubyani had settled in a fertile valley protected by the Ghassanid ruler An-Nuʿman ibn al-Harith. An-Nabighah warned them not to provoke Ghassan because he understood Ghassanid power and knew that unnecessary conflict would not serve his tribe. But some of his own people were angered by this warning. Badr ibn Hadar opposed his policy, mocked his caution, and accused him of fear. The opposing voice says, أبلغ زيادا وحين المرء مدركه وإن تكيس أو كان ابن أحذار. Tell Ziyad, a man's fate will reach him, even if he acts cleverly, even if he is the son of caution. This is a direct attack on An-Nabighah's political temperament. It says, all your cleverness, all your caution, all your carefulness will not save you. In other words, his own people were saying that caution was not manliness. That attack reveals the cost of his wisdom. An-Nabighah was not afraid because he lacked courage. He was afraid because he could see consequences. He understood that some enemies should not be provoked, some places should not be occupied, and some battles should not be fought simply to satisfy pride. In his poetry, fear is not always cowardice. Sometimes fear is knowledge. The same voice appears in his reply to Amir ibn at-Tufail. Amir was young, proud, ambitious, and eager for glory. An-Nabighah answers him not with uncontrolled abuse, but with the tone of an elder correcting a dangerous young man. فَإِنْ يَكُ عَامِرٌ قَدْ قَالَ جَهْلًا فَإِنَّ مَظِنَّةَ الْجَهْلِ الشَّبَابُ. If Amir has spoken in ignorance, then youth is the natural home of ignorance. Then he says, فَكُنْ كَأَبِيكَ أَوْ كَأَبِي بَرَاءٍ تُوَافِقْكَ الْحُكُومَةُ وَالصَّوَابُ. Be like your father or like Abu Bara, and sound judgment and right conduct will accompany you. This is not merely satire, it is instruction. An-Nabighah speaks almost like a father or an experienced elder. He does not need vulgar abuse. His correction is calm, dignified, and more cutting because of its restraint. Only after understanding this world can we understand the man himself. His name was Ziyad ibn Muawiyah, also known by the kunya Abu Umama from Dhubyani. He became known as An-Nabighah. The title means one who appears, emerges, or bursts forth. Some reports say he was called this because his poetry appeared after he had grown older and become established among his people. Other reports connect the name to a verse attributed to him. Whatever the exact explanation, the title became his identity. There were other poets called An-Nabighah, such as An-Nabighah al-Jadi and An-Nabighah ash-Shaybani, but when the name is mentioned without qualification, it usually means An-Nabighah ad-Dhubyani. His prestige among the Arabs became immense. The reports say that at the market of Ukaz, a leather tent was set up for him, and poets came to recite before him. Whether we take every detail literally or understand it as a symbol of his authority, the meaning is clear. An-Nabighah was not merely a poet, he was remembered as a judge of poetry. His taste became a standard. Early critics placed him among the highest poets of the Jahiliyyah. Ibn Salam al-Jumahi ranked him in the first class of pre-Islamic poets, beside Imru al-Qais, Zuhair, and al-Asha. A famous early saying summarizes the special field in which each poet excelled. Imru al-Qaisi idha rakiba, wa Zuhairun idha ragiba, wal-Nabighatu idha rahib, wal-Asha idha tariba. Imru al-Qais when he rode, Zuhair when he desired, An-Nabighah when he feared, and al-Asha when he sang in delight. That phrase, An-Nabighah when he feared, is extremely important. It does not mean that fear made him small, it means fear awakened his highest art. The crisis of fear produced his most controlled, persuasive, and unforgettable poetry. His authority was not limited to composing verse. The old reports describe him judging poets such as Ghassan ibn Thabit, al-Asha, and al-Kansa. Even if every detail of these anecdotes cannot be verified historically, they reveal how the Arabs remembered him as a standard of poetic taste. What made him worthy of such authority was not merely vocabulary or eloquence, it was the harmony between language, experience, and judgment. Many poets could describe a horse beautifully, many poets could praise a generous patron, many poets could boast of tribal victories. An-Nabighah did all these things, but beneath them lay something deeper. His poetry grows out of lived experience, his praise grows out of political reality, his apologies grow out of genuine fear, his wisdom grows out of long observation, his tribal poetry grows from responsibility rather than empty boasting. This is especially clear in his relationship with kings. The traditional biographies often tell a simple story. An-Nabighah enjoyed the favor of an-Nuʿman ibn al-Mundhir, the Lakmid king of al-Hira. Then he fell from favor, fled to the Ghassanids, and later returned after composing his famous apologies. But the full picture is more complex. The chronology is difficult, and the poems themselves suggest that his relationship with Ghassan may have begun earlier than the simple story allows. His movement between Ghassan and al-Hira may not have been one dramatic flight from one court to another, but part of a wider political life in which tribes and poets maintained relations with more than one powerful court. This matters because it changes how we see him. If we accept only the simple story, An-Nabighah appears as a frightened court poet who offended one king and escaped to another. But if we read the poems and the political background together, another image appears. He was a tribal diplomat moving between rival powers. The Ghassanids were tied to Byzantium, the Lakmids were tied to Persia. The tribes between them often had to negotiate with both. To An-Nabighah, maintaining relations with more than one court may have been sensible diplomacy. To an-Nuʿman, it could appear dangerously close to divided loyalty. The Ghassanid world left a strong mark on his imagination. He praises them not merely as generous patrons, but as a disciplined royal power. He sees in them Christianity, ceremony, military order, and a cultivated Syrian world different from the life of the Central Arabian tribes. He says, محلتهم ذات الإله ودينهم قويم فما يرجون غير العواقب. Their dwelling is in God's own land, their religion is upright, and their hope is fixed on nothing but the final reward. This verse should be read historically. An-Nabighah is not speaking in the later language of Islamic theology. He is recognizing what distinguished the Ghassanids in the eyes of many Arabs: organized religious life, kingship, courtly order, and a world connected to Syria and Byzantium. He also gives one of the most terrifying descriptions of military reputation in Arabic poetry. إذا ما غزوا بالجيش حلق فوقهم عصائب طير تهتدي بعصائب. Whenever they go forth with the army, flocks of birds wheel above them, one flock guiding another. These are birds of prey. They have learned from experience. Where this army marches, battle follows. Where battle follows, bodies fall. The birds arrive before the battle because the army's reputation has become part of nature itself. This is not only praise, it is warning. The image tells his own people, do not provoke a power whose victories are so regular that even the birds recognize them. His Ghassanid poetry also contains warmth and elegy. He says, لا يبعد الله جيرانا تركتهم مثل المصابيح تجلو ليلة الظلم. May God not make distant the neighbors I left, like lamps that brighten a night of darkness. And هم الملوك وأبناء الملوك لهم فضل على الناس في اللأواء والنعم. They are kings and sons of kings. They have excellence over people in hardship and blessing. Here, Ghassan is not merely a refuge from al-Hira, it is a world of royal dignity, but that dignity itself makes the situation dangerous, because the closer An-Nabighah came to Ghassan, the more suspicious he could appear to an-Nuʿman. The Lakmid court of al-Hira was the other great pole of his life. Al-Hira was not a simple desert encampment. It was a court city on the edge of the desert and the cultivated lands of Iraq, a place of kings, scribes, ministers, gifts, rival poets, tribal delegations, and Persian influence. A poet who reached al-Hira could gain wealth, reputation, and access to power. But he also entered a world of envy and intrigue. An-Nabighah rose high at the Lakmid court. He was not merely a passing poet who recited a poem and left. He enjoyed the favor of an-Nuʿman ibn al-Mundhir, known in Arabic poetry as Abu Qabus. The king honored him and brought him near. That closeness explains why the later crisis became so dangerous. One does not fear the anger of a stranger in the same way one fears the anger of a king whose confidence one has enjoyed for years. The tradition preserves several explanations for the rupture between An-Nabighah and an-Nuʿman. The most famous story concerns al-Mutajarridah, the wife of an-Nuʿman. According to this tradition, the king asked An-Nabighah to describe her beauty. The poet did so with such vivid skill that jealous enemies accused him of having seen what no outsider should have seen. Suspicion entered the king's heart, and An-Nabighah suddenly found himself in danger. The verse most often connected with this story is سقط النصيف ولم ترد إسقاطه فتناولته واتقتنا باليد. The veil fell, though she had not meant to drop it. She reached for it and shielded herself from us with her hand. The image is vivid and almost cinematic. A veil falls, a woman reaches for it, and the hand becomes a shield of modesty. It is easy to see how enemies at court could exploit such a verse. A poet's skill becomes evidence against him, but the suspicion cannot be reduced to one line alone. Some transmitted versions of the poem go much further, describing the body of the woman with a vividness that would have made the accusation easier to spread. These more intimate and explicit passages must be treated carefully because their authenticity is debated, and later transmitters may have expanded or altered the poem. Still, the story shows how dangerous court poetry could be. A poem that displayed genius could also create suspicion, and even this famous story is probably not the whole explanation. Court envy, political suspicion, tribal alliances, and An-Nabighah's relationship with the Ghassanids all help explain why his position became dangerous. To An-Nabighah, moving between courts could be diplomacy. To an-Nuʿman, it could look like divided loyalty. Whatever the immediate cause, one fact remains. An-Nabighah lost the favor of an-Nuʿman. Here his genius reached one of its highest forms. Many poets answered hostility with abuse. Many tribal leaders answered suspicion with threats. An-Nabighah answered with apology. But his apologies are not humiliating pleas. They are carefully constructed arguments. He swears his innocence, refutes slander, praises the king, acknowledges power, explains political reality, and preserves his dignity. He shows fear but not collapse. He seeks forgiveness but not disgrace. In one of his great apology poems, he says, لئن كنت قد بلغت عني خيانة لمبلغك الوشي أغش وأكذب. If you have been told that I betrayed you, then the informer who told you is more treacherous and more false. Notice the balance. He does not insult the king. He attacks the mechanism of slander. Then he swears, حلفت فلم أترك لنفسك ريبة وليس وراء الله للمرء مذهب. I swore, leaving no doubt within your heart. Beyond God there is no refuge for a man. The oath is not decorative. It sets the moral foundation of the apology. He places himself before the highest witness. If he lies after such an oath, there is nowhere left to flee. Then comes one of the most famous images in all Arabic poetry. فَإِنَّكَ كَاللَّيْلِ الَّذِي هُوَ مُدْرِكِي وَإِنْ خِلْتُ أَنَ الْمُنْتَأَ عَنْكَ وَاسِعٌ. You are like the night that will overtake me, even if I imagine that the distance from you is vast. The image is astonishing because of its simplicity. Night does not chase a traveler. It does not threaten him. It simply arrives. A man may cross deserts, climb mountains, and hide among tribes, but night overtakes everyone. An-Nabighah turns this ordinary fact of nature into one of the greatest metaphors for political power ever composed in Arabic. An-Nuʿman's authority is like night, unavoidable, surrounding, inevitable. Then he says, فَإِنَّكَ شَمْسٌ وَالْمُلُوكُ كَوَاكِبٌ إِذَا طَلَعَتْ لَمْ يَبْدُ مِنْهُنَّ كَوْكَبٌ. You are the sun, and kings are stars. When the sun rises, not one star remains visible. Again, the image is effortless. The sun does not argue with the stars. It simply rises, and their light disappears. This is An-Nabighah's art at its highest, familiar images carrying immense meaning. Night becomes inevitable power. The sun becomes royal supremacy. Stars become lesser kings. The visible world becomes the language of political truth. His apology also includes a deeper political argument. He does not simply deny that he knew other kings. He openly acknowledges his relations with them. ملوك وإخوان إذا ما أتيتهم أحكم في أموالهم وأقرب. They are kings and brothers. Whenever I come to them, I am entrusted with authority over their wealth and brought near. At first, this seems dangerous. Why would a man accused of divided loyalty openly admit such relationships? Because An-Nabighah is making a larger argument. Gratitude is not treason. Honor given by one king does not erase loyalty to another. In the tribal world between rival kingdoms, a man could have obligations in more than one direction. He is trying to teach the king the difference between diplomacy and betrayal. This is why his apologies are so powerful. They are not merely emotional, they are intellectually persuasive. He speaks as a man who understands that politics is rarely a simple choice between absolute friendship and absolute enmity. It is often a matter of balancing obligations without losing honor. According to the traditional reports, these apologies eventually succeeded. Some accounts mention 2 men of Fazara who interceded on his behalf. Others mention Isam ibn Shahbar, the chamberlain of An-Nuʿman, who helped restore communication between the poet and the king. Another famous report says that An-Nabighah recited from behind a curtain, and An-Nuʿman recognized the voice of his old poet before the poem was finished. Whether every detail is certain or not, the meaning of the story is clear. Poetry could restore a man's place after political disaster. The reconciliation also shows that kings did not value poetry merely as entertainment. The greatest Arab ruler wanted the greatest Arab poet beside him because poetry itself was part of political authority. Kings strengthened poets through gifts. Poets strengthened kings through immortal praise. Each gave permanence to the other. An-Nabighah's relationship with An-Nuʿman was therefore not only fear, it also involved attachment, gratitude, and a recognition of what kingship meant. When news came that An-Nuʿman was ill or perhaps dead, An-Nabighah's poetry takes on a tone of anxious grief. أَلَمْ أُقْسِمْ عَلَيْكَ لِتُخْبِرَنِّي أَمَحْمُولٌ عَلَى النَّاشِ الْهُمَامِ. Did I not adjure you to tell me, is the noble lord being carried on the bier? Then he says, فَإِنْ يَهْلِكْ أَبُو قَابُوسَ يَهْلِكْ رَبِيعُ النَّاسِ وَالشَّهْرُ الْحَرَامِ. If Abu Qaboos dies, then dies the springtime of men and the sacred month. This is not the language of a man who only feared a patron. It is the language of a poet who understood what a king represented: order, generosity, prestige, and protection. To lose such a figure was to lose a season of safety. In another poem, he imagines the return of An-Nuʿman as joy. وَإِنْ يَرْجِعِ النُّعْمَانُ نَفْرَحْ وَنَبْتَهِجْ وَيَأْتِ مَعَدًّا مُلْكُهَا وَرَبِيعُهَا. If An-Nuʿman returns, we rejoice and are glad. Ma'ad receives its kingship and its spring. But if he dies, وَإِنْ يَهْلِكِ النُّعْمَانُ تُعْرَ مَطِيُّهُ وَيُلْقَ إِلَى جَنْبِ الْفِنَاءِ قُطُوعُهَا. If An-Nuʿman dies, his riding beasts are left bare, and their worn gear is cast beside the courtyard. The image moves from political loss to domestic emptiness. The king's death is seen not only in public grief but in abandoned objects. This is one of An-Nabigah's greatest gifts. He makes political events visible. If we stop with the apology poems, however, we still do not understand the whole man. Looking across the Dīwān, An-Nabighah emerges as far more than a court poet. He is one of the first great political minds expressed through Arabic poetry. He constantly asks, how does a tribe survive? How does it keep its honor without destroying itself? How does it remain loyal to allies while adapting to changing realities? How should one approach kings? When should one fight, and when should one restrain anger? These questions run throughout his poetry. An-Nabighah was not merely the ordinary poet of the tribe who praises his people and attacks their enemies. His tribal poetry reveals a clear policy. He sought to protect the tribe from internal division, prevent unnecessary external war, preserve allies, and maintain peace without surrendering strength. In other words, his tribal poetry is not propaganda only, it is political thought. This also explains why his poetry often feels more restrained than the poetry of many warriors. He does not glorify war for its own sake. He admires courage, but he admires prudence more. He respects strength, but he knows that strength without discipline becomes ruin. One of his most famous moral verses expresses the same worldview. فَلَسْتَ بِمُسْتَبْقٍ أَخًا لَا تَلُمُّهُ عَلَى شَعَثٍ أَيُّ الرِّجَالِ الْمُهَذَّبِ. You will never keep a brother unless you mend what is disordered in him, for what man is entirely refined? The word lamma carries the meaning of gathering what is scattered, repairing what has come apart, and a sharthu is disorder, roughness, flaw, disarray. So the verse is not merely saying, ignore faults. It is saying, if you want to keep a brother, you must help gather what is scattered in him. You must repair, forgive, and bear with imperfection. For who among men is completely free of fault? This is much more than advice between friends. It is a philosophy of social life. No tribe survives if every fault ends in alliance. No kingdom remains stable if every mistake becomes treason. No friendship endures without forgiveness. An-Nabighah understood human imperfection, and he knew that wisdom often means preserving imperfect relationships rather than destroying them in the name of purity. This is why he is close in temperament to Zuhair ibn Abi Sulma. Both poets saw the cost of war. Both understood the value of reconciliation. Both believed that wisdom preserves what courage alone cannot. But there is a difference. Zuhair often speaks like a moral philosopher. An-Nabighah speaks like a political advisor. His wisdom grows not only from reflection but from practical experience among tribes and kings. If we compare him with Imru al-Qais, the contrast is even sharper. Imru al-Qais lives through adventure, love, wine, hunting, storms, and the restless self. An-Nabighah lives through diplomacy, alliances, kings, responsibility, fear, and public speech. If we compare him with Antara, the difference is also clear. Antara's poetry celebrates heroic courage, individual honor, and battle. An-Nabighah understands war, but he spends much of his poetic energy trying to prevent unnecessary wars, restrain reckless men, and preserve the political body of the tribe. In many ways, An-Nabighah's tribe became an image of himself. When he speaks for Dhubyani, he is not merely performing a public duty. He feels the tribe as part of his own being. The personal and the collective merge. His emotion is tribal, and his tribal concern is deeply personal. This is why the attacks on his caution matter so much. They show the cost of his political maturity. He was not always applauded for restraint. Some of his own people attacked him for it. Yet he remained committed to moderation, alliance, and careful judgment. In a culture where rash courage could win admiration, An-Nabighah had the courage to seem cautious. That is one of the deepest lessons of his poetry. Now we must turn from biography and politics to the poetry itself. Why was An-Nabighah considered one of the greatest poets in Arabic? The answer is not only historical, it is literary. The early critics did not admire him merely because he stood before kings. Many poets praised kings, many poets defended tribes, many poets traveled between courts, yet very few were placed among the highest class of the Jahili poets. An-Nabighah was. His greatness rested upon the quality of his language, the strength of his imagery, the balance of his compositions, the precision of his expressions, and above all, his ability to make image, emotion, and situation serve one another. Unlike some later poets, An-Nabighah rarely seeks beauty for its own sake. His images are beautiful because they are necessary. Nothing feels merely ornamental. Everything advances the emotional or political movement of the poem. One of his artistic qualities is the ability to combine simplicity of expression with deliberate construction. Sometimes he gives us an image with almost no ornament: night, the sun, the stars, the flawed brother. At other times, he carefully builds a full scene, adding detail upon detail until the image becomes almost narrative. This is clear in the famous wild bull passage in his Mu'allaqah, where the camel journey is compared to a wild bull pursued by hunting dogs. He does not simply say the animal is strong. He follows it through the night, the cold, the fear, the dogs, the wound, the struggle, and the final victory. The image becomes a complete scene. The poet slows down because the situation matters. This is different from artificial decoration. An-Nabighah's art is often what later critics might call easy but impossible. It appears natural yet cannot be easily imitated. The craft is hidden. The listener feels the image before noticing the labor behind it. His Mu'allaqah begins with one of the most famous openings in Arabic poetry. يا دار ميت بالعليا فالسند أقوت وطال عليها سالف الأبد. O dwelling of Maya, on the high ground and the rising slope, you are deserted now and long ages have passed over you. From the first verse, An-Nabighah makes the abandoned campsite into more than a memory of love. It becomes time made visible. The beloved has gone, the people have departed, the traces remain. Like many great pre-Islamic qasidas, the poem moves from ruins to journey, from journey to description, from description to praise or apology. At first glance, these sections may appear separate, but in An-Nabighah they often form one emotional movement. The ruins prepare the sorrow prepares the journey prepares the meeting with the king. The praise or apology grows naturally from the poet's danger. His imagery is deeply sensory. He rarely explains emotions abstractly. He makes us see them. Fear becomes night. Power becomes the sun. Loyalty becomes armor. Armies summon birds of prey. Generosity becomes flowing water. Ruin becomes abandoned camps. Political danger becomes a lion drawing near. The visible world becomes the vocabulary of the invisible soul. This is why so many of his verses became immortal. A listener never forgets seeing night overtaking the traveler, nor does one forget the stars disappearing before the sun. The image enters the imagination before the mind begins to analyze it. At the same time, his poetry was not free from criticism. Some early critics praised his naturalness and lack of heavy artificiality, while others criticized certain faults. Some said that he sometimes cared more for the idea than for expression. Others criticized moments of exaggeration or imprecision. The most famous technical fault attached to his name is iqwa, a rhyme irregularity in which different case vowels appear in the rhymes of one poem. The tradition even says that he was made aware of this through song because people were too hesitant to tell him directly that he had erred. This criticism is useful. It prevents us from turning him into a perfect statue. His greatness does not lie in technical flawlessness. It lies in the force of his poetry as a whole. Its dignity, clarity, political intelligence, emotional control, and unforgettable imagery. The Diwan also shows his range. His poems include apology, praise, satire, tribal defense, wisdom, description, elegy, warning, and political counsel. Yet one recurring music runs through all of it, the song of the tribe. Even when he speaks personally, the tribe is present. Even when he praises kings, tribal survival is present. Even when he apologizes, political reality is present. His Diwan is therefore much more than a collection of beautiful poems. It is a record of Arab political life before Islam. It contains many names of tribes, kings, places, battles, alliances, and political incidents. Through it, we see the late Jahili world before its transformation, tribal honor, frontier kingdoms, Persian and Byzantine influence, Christian Arab courts, desert migration, seasonal markets, and the immense authority of poetry. The survival of his Diwan is itself part of his legacy. His poetry reached later generations through major recensions and commentaries, especially those associated with al-Asma'i and Ibn as-Sikit. Later scholars and editors compared manuscripts, variant narrations, and earlier transmissions. The Diwan was printed with other pre-Islamic poets, edited separately and repeatedly republished and explained. This long chain of transmission shows his stature. Many poets disappeared. Others survived only in fragments. An-Nabighah remained a poet to be studied, memorized, explained, cited, and debated. Through him, we witness an Arabia standing on the threshold of enormous change. Within only a few decades of his lifetime, the world he knew would be transformed. The kingdoms of Ghassan and al-Hirah would disappear. The rivalry between Byzantium and Persia would be overtaken by the rise of Islam. The tribal world that filled his poetry would enter a new historical order. Yet precisely because that world disappeared, his poetry became even more valuable. It preserved the voice of pre-Islamic Arabia at one of its highest moments. For the Arabs before Islam, poetry was never merely entertainment. It preserved genealogy, it defended reputation, it negotiated peace, it justified war, it praised rulers, it rebuked enemies, it mourned the dead, it celebrated generosity, it advised the young, it instructed the old, it remembered what history might otherwise forget. An-Nabighah mastered all these functions. He could stand before abandoned ruins with tenderness. He could describe a camel crossing the desert with precision. He could portray wild animals, storms, rivers, armies, and battles with unforgettable imagery. He could praise kings without losing dignity. He could apologize without surrendering honor. He could defend his tribe while warning it against its own mistakes. He could transform political experience into universal wisdom. For this reason, An-Nabighah ad-Dhubyani deserves to be remembered not simply as the poet of An-Nuʿman, nor only as the master of apology, nor merely as one of the authors of the Mu'allaqat. He deserves to be remembered as one of the great architects of classical Arabic expression, a poet who stood between tribe and kingdom, desert and civilization, diplomacy and literature, politics and art. His life reminds us that before Islam, poetry was already one of the highest forms through which the Arabs understood themselves. And among those voices, few spoke with greater wisdom, greater restraint, or greater authority than An-Nabighah ad-Dhubyani. In the next video, we will leave behind the biography and enter the poetry itself. Rather than speaking about An-Nabighah, we will allow An-Nabighah to speak for himself, from the opening ruins and memories of the Nasib, through the journey across the desert, the camel and wild animal scenes, the praise of kings, the great apologies to An-Nuʿman, the defense of Banu Asad, the warnings to Dubyan, and the reflections on honor, loyalty, and human character that secured his place among the greatest poets of the Arabic language.